Welcome to another episode of Holistic Health Habits, the podcast where we explore the latest trends, innovations, and insights into holistic health and wellness. I'm your host, Surani Fernando. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Joanna Tandberg, the founder and CEO of ZV Botanicals, or ZV Botanicals, and she's an Ayurveda wellness counselor. Jo and her dedicated team are on a mission to guide individuals towards healthier, more balanced lives through transformative practices of Ayurveda and mindfulness. Joanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So just to kick us off, can you tell me a little bit about your background, your journey that led you to the wellness space, and what inspired you to found ZV Botanicals, or ZV?
No, yeah, both are perfect. Sure, that's a great question. I was not raised in this world of Ayurveda or yoga, for that matter. I was raised in a very kind of structured, conservative, United States Southern Catholic military background. Growing up in kind of all that is encompassed what your day-to-day life would be like. With a lot of trust in, doctors and those ahead of you or in front of you as far as seniority, and usually men, telling us what to do and how to do it and follow the rules, and including my dad, who was an Army colonel. And when I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I was a sophomore in college, so it was just before I turned 20. And I, looking back, I probably had quite a long journey of the illness up to that point, but kept most of it to myself. Being a young girl, supposed to look pretty and, look dressed nice and go to church on Sundays, and had a miserable stomach all the time, and just kind of dealt with it, and had really difficult times with my monthly cycle. I had horrific cramps. Just my life was not easy when it came to like physical moving forward, physically, like just getting on with life. After I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in college, I was pretty much left on my own to follow doctor's orders, and that was to take a large amount of pharmaceutical drugs. I was on steroids, prednisone, off and on at high doses for eventually about 13 years. So that was a big problem with me, both with the mental state, my inability to sleep. I went through that swelling period when I was in like my early 20s, which was very embarrassing. Hair loss. Mood swings, a lot of issues, relating to the hormones, but there's steroid therapy.
Yeah.
I was also put on different immune suppressant drugs, which is pretty common. At least back in the 90s, a lot of the way that Crohn's disease was looked at, well, before I was diagnosed, women specifically who were diagnosed with Crohn's disease or had illnesses that related to the digestion that were eventually diagnosed with Crohn's were often told it was in their head. And now I see that from more of a natural perspective. Yeah, it is the way we process stress, but there was also a genetic component to this. My father had Crohn's. My grandfather had diverticulitis. It runs in my family, having gastroenterological diseases. So I continued down that path into my 30s, really, of just taking the drugs, taking new drugs, being one of the first people in the United States to go on an IV therapy back in 1998, I think it was, after the birth of my first child, because at this point I was kind of teetering on if I'm going to stay alive or not, because I had a really hard time absorbing nutrients and a very difficult time just functioning. My daughter, when she was born, breastfeeding was difficult because of the fact that I couldn't absorb nutrients well. I wasn't easily able to pass on those nutrients to my baby. So mentally, I went through a lot because I felt like I wasn't a good mother. I had to supplement with formula, which was, against the way I wanted to raise my baby. But I got through it. And then I got pregnant with my second child, which was an unexpected pregnancy, a joy, but unexpected because of my health was so poor. We didn't think I could handle a second pregnancy with the high risk group that I was in. By the time my son was born, I was gravely ill. And as a consequence of both the drugs I was taking prescribed to me, and I think just the way the pregnancy kind of just really racked my body, my son was born with health issues himself. And they started from an infant. So he had severe eczema, he had advanced asthma, and he was allergic to everything. So that took my life a whole nother level, because now it's not just myself I'm trying to take care of. Now I'm trying to take care of a baby and a toddler. And I was single quite a bit. I was married to a pilot at the time and did a lot of solo parenting. So it was a rough time in my life. And that opened up my world. And so, more on point to answer your question, I started just practicing yoga. My first memories of really getting on a yoga mat were with my first child, my baby, who's now 26, and like doing a downward dog, not even knowing what I was doing, with her underneath me, and then like laying on my back and picking her up, and learning ways to move my body and breathe that didn't hurt. Then I was taking classes, eventually fell in love with yoga. And yoga is the sister science of Ayurveda, which translated is wisdom, or the knowledge of life, or the science of living. And when I understood that the sister sciences of Ayurveda and yoga and the potential for healing, I dove in. And that was the beginning of where I am now.
Okay. And for just our listeners, who might have heard of Ayurveda but aren't really familiar with, what it is, its origins, and also things like traditional Chinese medicine, are you able to just, briefly describe what these ancient practices are, where they come from, how they've sort of intersected now and entered the modern sort of wellness space?
Yes, absolutely. So the practice of Ayurveda as a medicine dates back to at least 5,000 years. And this is during what was called the Vedic period of India. And the earliest references to Ayurveda and its sister science yoga appear in scholarly texts that were called the Vedas, the Vedic texts. And those texts are broken into different volumes, different books. And within those are basically all the prescriptions, and not the way we look at prescriptions now, but prescription on how to live in a way which honors nature within ourselves and around us. And so first they were taught and shared orally. And before there was even a text, it was handed down within every family. A member, typically a boy, would be given these texts were done in chants. They were done in like a song, where they could learn and understand how the rhythms of the body are in conversation with and in a dance with the same natures around us, the elements of space and air, fire, water, and earth elements. And Chinese medicine is very similar. They have some different words, and it's more culturally appropriated to where it's from. But Ayurveda, there's a little bit of competition of which came first, Ayurveda or Chinese medicine. They're very similar. The understanding historically is kind of the origin was from southern India and the Kerala region. And then as people migrated around the world, different medical programs, sciences, and philosophies were birthed according to those cultures. So in Chinese medicine, we're going to have more of a Chinese understanding and culture. Tibetan medicine is another way, Greek medicine, and they just use the plants, the foods, the song, the dance, the colors, whatever was in that community and that culture became more of that medicines. But we really find the origin to come from India.
Okay. And medicines that come from Ayurveda, do the resources, are they specifically connected with the region of Kerala? Like, or is it, can you find the products everywhere?
Both. Originally, like if we look through the ancient texts and the original recipes to many of these beautiful formulas that have been used both, internally and topically, they were all original from that area. However, it's based on the properties of the plants. So if we have a plant that, that we use in a formula that comes from southern India, and that only comes from southern India, that does not mean that we can't replicate those same characteristics from other plants in other regions. And currently, today's present modern world, especially after COVID, we've really, as a profession in Ayurveda, we are taking it very seriously how to create an Ayurvedic community, no matter where you live in the world, what foods you have. And I'm in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. It's cooler, it's damper, it's very, very different than southern India. So it's not possible to grow the same plants here. However, we can grow plants that have similar medical value and then use them to substitute, which is the regenerative kind of future way of spreading Ayurveda.
I mean, I'm a little bit familiar with it. My, roots are from Sri Lanka. I was born and bred in Australia, but family from Sri Lanka, and the movement is quite strong there as well. Very close to Kerala, so I'm like
Yes.
curious as to like that region also has everything that comes from the original practice of Ayurveda.
Well, so many of the herbs are unfortunately going into a place of hard to find, or they're going extinct. And so some of our, with the formulas I was creating, I had to make some substitutions within the first couple of years. For example, jatamansi, which was one of the plants I use for to help with anxiety, and one of my calming formulas called Bliss. Within a couple of years, I learned from one of the doctors I study with, who helps with my formulations, that this is becoming harder to find. And companies that make Ayurvedic products, when they truly care about the earth and they truly care regenerative processes, they will stop either selling that something with that herb, or they will find a substitute, or they will hold until there's been time for the plant to kind of go through its next level of healing. When you have too much of anything taken because of the plethora of, pharmaceutical companies and herb companies around the country that may not have these practices in place, suddenly you might find, what you need is no longer available. So taking time to let fields recover, to let trees grow. If a tree is being processed for its sap, for instance, and you come in and you just start scraping the entire tree all at once, you're going to kill the tree, you're going to kill the growth. And so practices need to be looked at, one side of the tree at a certain time of year, and then waiting maybe 2 years before the next harvest and things of that nature. So there's a lot to consider, and then looking at what can you do locally.
Yeah. Okay. And so, you had that, very roller coaster journey for quite a big chunk of your life. And then you dove into yoga, and then went deeper into Ayurveda. So when did you actually start ZV Botanicals?
I actually started formally in 2018. Back in the early, I would say 2010 to 12, I started learning more and more about cannabis as medicine. I was living on the West Coast. I grew up on the East Coast. So moving from the Southeast to Pacific Northwest Washington State, and then I was living in California for a bit, going through my studies, and then back to Washington State. I was kind of on the forefront, or I was in the periphery, but this part of the country was on the forefront of normalizing and legalizing marijuana, and switching the terminology from, kind of these words that were meant to have more of a detrimental meaning to the actual scientific versions and understanding of the plant medicine and cannabis. So I started exploring that because one of the ailments or issues that was being approved for a medical marijuana card in California when I was living there was Crohn's disease. And I was like, really? And, I, like many people, especially I grew up in the 80s and 90s, a little bit in the 70s, we never thought about, first of all, we didn't call it cannabis. We didn't think of it in the form of an oil or a tincture or a tea. It was something that you kind of smoked, went to a concert. It was done in a recreational and illegal way. And even though everybody seemed to have some experience with it. So I dove in wanting to understand that. And as I started finding actual nurses and doctors and associations and nonprofits and different events, such as national conventions and conferences where all of these different scientists and medical personnel were coming together, plus patients saying, this is my experience, it blew my mind. It changed everything for me, because I then saw another tool that I could combine with Ayurveda. I thought, as I was learning Ayurveda, like, why couldn't we study all this together? And that became something I did at home. Like, I would be mixing, I could make my own tincture. I lived in a place where it was growing in people's yards. And I had friends that grew cannabis, and I had herbs from Ayurveda. And so I thought, what if I put these together and make a skin cream for my son who has severe eczema, or my brother who has severe eczema also? What if I make a tincture for myself to try to stop these cramps? And then my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic melanoma, and the melanoma had spread to his lymph nodes, his adrenal glands, his lungs, and his liver, with possibly a spot in his stomach. And that took everything to a much bigger level, because now I was determined to really dive in and save my dad, because I wasn't ready to let go of my dad. He was only in his 60s at the time. And that kind of spurred what became ZV Botanicals, although my company and the products I made with ZV were not specifically the same ones of what I did for some of my private clients. Those were, some of what I did for my clients was not able, I didn't have the kind of finances to start a company that would allow me to do the freedoms that I wanted to do. So I had to find a way to, meet people where they're at and stay within the legal law, the legal limits of what I could do with an online business.
Okay. So ZV Botanicals is more like Ayurveda 2.0. Like, I guess cannabis doesn't exist in the Ayurveda realm, but you're sort of bridging the two together and bringing CBD to mixing it with Ayurveda principles.
Yes and no. So, in modern world, going back 10 years, do cannabis and Ayurveda meet together? No. If you look at ancient texts of Ayurveda that weren't necessarily publicly taught to us, yes, there was talk. They used them more in teas and in milk drinks called bang, like a chai drink. They would also pulverize the roots and use the roots in ways that we should be using now, but they typically go into a compost pile. So there were different uses for cannabis, but it was, one of my creative ideas that I would present to some of the doctors that were my professors, and they were real thrilled. I was not, they weren't bragging about me, let's just say that. So, however, after consistently like sharing my stories of my family and my dad, his story is phenomenal. And then clients that I started, let me go back. I went back to school. I became certified as a cannabis clinician through multiple programs. I really dove in to understand the science, not just like have this wishful thinking.
Right.
Well, that wouldn't it be great if, but no, actually following an understanding and making products, formulating according to what we know to be true. And cannabis is studied more than 95% of approved FDA pharmacy grade drugs. And most people don't realize that. They think it's an unknown, but it is one of the most studied plants on the planet. So when I started putting these ideas together, it was really because I was trying to create something for people that didn't want to take too many extra supplements, and it was hard enough to incorporate one new thing in their life. So for instance, to get my dad to take an herb plus a tincture, probably going to be hard to do. So what if I combine the herbs and the CBD tincture into one bottle, and then maybe there's a better chance? And so it was really,
I don't know what a tincture is.
So you're not the only one. You're not the only one. And actually, I use the word tincture somewhat loosely because there's different, I could get into like the backgrounds of our language, and it's confusing. But a tincture is something that is an herb that has been infused in a liquid. In this case, it's an oil base, so that you have that nice omega-3 369 ratioed fat oil to hold the herb encapsulated inside that, and then you put it underneath your tongue. And so it comes in I don't have one in front of me, but it comes in like a 1 ounce or a 2 ounce brown glass bottle.
Right.
And so some people will call it an infusion. I went back and forth on what to call it, but that's what it would be for. So I was not making pills or capsules or tablets. I was putting them in infused oil because in my training, the absorbability of cannabis is best when mixed with a fat-soluble oil, such as olive oil or hemp oil or coconut oil.
Okay.
So I get asked that a lot.
Yeah. And the
nice thing is, no, it's okay. And the nice thing is about using an oil like that is you can also put it on your skin. And so, it's absorbed sublingually, so it goes right into your bloodstream and there's nothing wrong with taking cannabis as something you eat or drink, for instance, but it just metabolizes very differently. It goes through the digestive process versus right to your blood. And when it goes through the digestive process, it has to go through a different form of metabolizing in the liver, which can also have the user experience it much stronger than they would have if it just went into their bloodstream, which sounds opposite of how it would be true. You'd think that in the blood, maybe you wouldn't feel it as strongly, but in the digestive system, it would be less so, but it's the opposite.
Okay. And so you were developing these products and you had your dad in mind with one of them.
I did. And he actually, he was taking something that had high levels of THC. because when you work with THC levels at a higher ratio than CBD, these are two different cannabinoids out of a couple hundred that are found within the plant of cannabis in the flower or the bud.
Yeah.
And the THC, when it's heated, it's actually an acid molecule. When you heat it to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, that acid molecule drops. It becomes a more healing agent for many things, not for everything, but it also increases that psychoactivity that one might feel, like that kind of high or just different feeling that you might feel. CBD, cannabidiol, does not have that psychoactive experience. And what it does, it actually synergizes and balances that THC. So when someone ingests something that's high THC and low to no CBD, they might get too much of it. They feel what's called like green sick, like, vertigo and nausea, and they lose their balance and they feel miserable. They can't die from it. No one has ever died from an overdose of cannabis ever, but they can feel pretty lousy. And the CBD helps to negate that and balance it out. And so it also affects the body differently when you have both those components. So my products were very low in THC because that was the government that is the government guideline in order for me to ship to 50 states and to sell over state lines. If when working with my father, within the state of Washington, I was able to provide him with very high levels of THC, which is a much stronger tumor killer, if you will, to help go directly to the cancer itself. So not only were we looking for palliative care to help him have an appetite and help him sleep better, but I was actually going, let's just go full bore and see if we can shoot this cancer out of his body. And he did not do chemotherapy or radiation because the melanoma had spread too far. But we were able to completely reverse his cancer, and he has been cancer-free since 2016.
Wow. So he was not a candidate for chemotherapy. So he was stage 4 or something like that. And then.
Yeah, he was told that he was diagnosed in June, and they did not think he'd make it till the end of the year.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was a rough time. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. I mean, it blew my mind. I'm still kind of pinch me. Did that really happen? And
because it was kind of I guess you had nothing to lose really with trying different options, and the risk benefit was really, in favor of just going for it. And then it just surprised everyone completely.
Everyone. And, and like I said, my dad, he is not I wasn't raised in an ashram or in some hippie farm in California, which I was very, very different. My dad had never smoked pot in his life. He's more of a scotch and, maybe a glass of wine, nice Cabernet kind of person. But this was not his medicine. My mom to this day she's still not really into it. She still kind of questions the whole thing, even though watched it with her own eyes.
Right. And what was the reaction from the medical community, like the oncology community, seeing, or the doctor that said, you've got this much time?
Oh, that's a whole nother interview in itself. I could talk for days about that one and try not to get my hairs on my neck raised up. It was not a pleasant experience. My dad was a patient at Emory University in Atlanta, very prestigious, very renowned, right next to the CDC. And his doctor was the lead melanoma oncologist who'd been there forever. He's a dinosaur of a doctor, and a very nice guy, and very, I was there for day one. I flew in from the West Coast with my brother. We both flew in and said, oh my God, what's going to happen now? You just don't know. And any of your listeners that have been through a diagnosis like this, it is a traumatic day that you'll never forget. And, sitting in that office and hearing everything that was, which was going to happen basically, and how bad the situation was. And I immediately was ready. I mean, I showed up ready with my notes. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to change your diet. We're going to add these herbs. We're going to remove these, carcinogenic activities of foods and drinks. And we're going to start you on this oil therapy. And the oncologist looked at me and chuckled and kind of rolled his eyes and made a few comments about frankincense being weird and not understanding what I'm talking about, and then offered my dad to go out for beers after I leave for the left coast, quote unquote. And I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
So then fast forward, and a little caveat. So when my dad was diagnosed, and we were given one possible drug that was a new drug, that was an infusion-based drug to help. It was still in the testing stages. And when I read through the 5 pages of, side effects and studies, everybody died within 5 years that took this drug. So although it extended life, it did not necessarily make life wonderful, and it did not cure the cancer.
Right.
The main two side effects to this drug that were the worst. One was it could perforate your colon and put you into either you could bleed to death, have sepsis, or end up with Crohn's disease. Well, my dad already had Crohn's disease. He's already been through 35 years of issues with his colon and small intestine. So I was like, Dad, you can't take this drug. And then the second side effect is a rare but becoming more common disease called, and I never get this right, so I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, myasthenia gravis, which is a neurological, it's like a miscommunication or a misfire between the brain and the ability to breathe, swallow, and talk. So those are pretty big side effects. And so my dad started instead on the protocol that I recommended, which surprised me beyond what you could imagine. My parents are not necessarily into this whole health holistic world, so this is all kind of woo-woo to them. But they were, scared, and it was an opportunity for them to try something that did not come with side effects. Except, Dad, you're going to sleep a lot. That's really the worst that's going to happen to you for now. So after the first PET scan, after we started the medication, this would have been 2.5 months later, so about 8 to 10 weeks, it showed that one of the tumors has slightly shrunk, nothing had spread, and everything else was stable, which to me and my brother and those of us that were outside of mom and dad thought was phenomenal. Like, this is a fast-growing silent killer of cancer, and it has not grown at all, and it's only either stayed present or gotten smaller in a lung. However, the oncologist team convinced my dad that he should try this new drug because you've got to do something. And I was like, but you are doing something, Dad. So we did it anyways. And they recommended 29 infusions over the course of like 13 or 16 months or something. So we went in for the first infusion, felt nothing, felt fine, waited 3 weeks between each one. And, I'm kind of biting my knuckles through all this because I just know what could happen. And I've seen too much of this with other clients because now I've got a client base. I've got stories to tell. And on the third infusion, third or the fourth, I can't remember now, he ended up in the ER with, he had perforated his colon and he needed a blood transfusion and he was very sick. And my mom called me hysterical, your dad's going to die. I'm like, he's going to be okay. And he was, he did, he survived, but that was the end of that.
Okay.
So he did those. So he did not even 10% of the infusions they recommended, or maybe 10%. However, on the last meeting with his oncologist, who's still around, and that's kind of shocking to me, the oncologist said to my dad, you are still cancer-free thanks to our infusion drugs. And I looked at my dad and I said, that's not true.
Yeah.
So they don't acknowledge what I did, and I mean, not what I did, but what was done.
Right.
They don't acknowledge, which is really maddening to me because it's a disservice to other patients in oncology wards across this country that there are other options. And my dad now struggles terribly with myasthenia gravis. So he was diagnosed 2 years ago. He has nearly died 3 times and has to take weekly infusions and daily pills to swallow and breathe and eat.
Okay. So it was like he got the side effects of that drug, but
he did,
but not the benefits, and possibly an emergency. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I tell people often when, and it's a really difficult decision when you are in the throes of a diagnosis of cancer and you have different people, all these different specialists coming at you, from an Eastern perspective, from a Western perspective, from an integrated, it doesn't matter. It's a major decision that you're making. And what I like to remind people is, when it comes to the pharmaceutical side of things or surgery or radiation, you can't turn it off. You can't take it back. So if you're sure of your decision, you have to be really sure of your decision. And if you haven't already tried other things that are less toxic to your system, why not do that first? I never say don't do it. I never say to a client, don't sell my place, to say no to chemo or radiation or surgery or whatever it may be. But what I do try to remind people is it's a decision you can't take back. And I've seen so many people let fear make their decision for them and then have such deep regrets. I've seen success stories too, but I tend to see more success stories when the holistic perspective is up front. And then it's integrated with something that might have toxic side effects so that you're at least preparing your body for the worst case scenario versus giving it the worst case scenario and then trying to fix it later with a holistic approach.
Yeah. And do you find that doctors are receptive in general to, looking beyond just the medicine, like the Western medicine, like these days? Because that's kind of what I actually come from more of I studied medical science. I'm a journalist that has actually covered that sector for 15 years. And this is why, like, with these podcasts, I am more interested in the other side, like the holistic health side, because I do believe that, that should be a priority. And then the pharmaceutical is an option. It's a sort of like a tool, but should be a last resort because, like you said, there are the side effects that come with it, and it is like putting a band-aid on something that we need to like solve from the root. And I sort of wonder whether the medical community have, you know, clicked on that a little bit with, yes, we've got these options, but you've also got to look at other things like diet and, the holistic wellness space as well, in conjunction with if we're going to put you on heavier meds.
Agreed. I think it depends on where you are. Different parts, just within our country, in the United States, you can get vastly different opinions depending if you're in the deep South versus like somewhere up in, New York or in California. It also, I think, is quite telling that still to this day, I think the number maybe is up to 10% of medical school curriculums even talk about medical cannabis or herbal medicine. Most medical schools, even gastroenterologists who study the digestive system, get maybe 2 hours of nutrition training. So it's an unfortunate truth. And at least in the United States, our medical schools are governed by the American Medical Association, which is governed by pharmaceutical companies. The curriculum is a pharmaceutical-based curriculum, and that's just a fact. It's not an opinion. And because of that, you have these young people with these aspiring careers to go help their communities in medicine. And there's a big weeding out or brainwashing. I know kids in medical school that I've known since they were 5 years old. And I know, they're not young anymore. They're in their mid to late 20s who were raised by parents who, had a doula for birth and a naturopath as their family doctor. And, they would go to the apothecary before they go to the drugstore. But as soon as that young person becomes an adult and graduates college and is in a medical school program, all that is out the window. They're like reprogrammed. And so then their life experience, it might take them 10 to 20 years to come back around unless they go in with that intention to understand and integrate the holistic side of medicine. Because let's face it, holistic medicine, herbal medicine has been around for at least 5,000, if not 10,000 years. Where I'm from in Washington, the Native American tribes have lived in the same exact area for 10,000 years. I mean, we know that for a fact. And they were not taking pills. They were making medicine out of the elderberries and the hazelnuts and the Oregon grape that grows nearby and the echinacea that grows. I mean, they were making their own medicine, and here we still are alive today as human beings on this planet. So, our evolutionary medicine is based on herbs and plants.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the brainwashing part is so interesting because, I think that, yeah, you go into the realm of Western medicine and yes, it's very much like we can only say that this does this if it's statistically significant because it's been in that clinical trial that has a lot of money behind it and it's got the evidence is there. And then it's anything else that's outside, which obviously we all know doesn't have the funding to back a massive clinical trial. It hasn't been proven. The evidence isn't there. But it's like, can we just be real about it? Like the evidence is not there because no one is putting the funding behind studying it because it's not going to make any money.
Exactly.
Feel about it.
And if they do, like for instance, turmeric is a great example. So turmeric has been used as one of the number one, top 10 herbs in pharmacopoeia of Ayurveda that are easy and accessible. I mean, there are so many herbs in the book of Ayurveda, but certain ones like turmeric and ginger and black pepper for digestion and inflammation and things of that nature are just easy. Most people can get their hands on it. And when we're, cinnamon and cardamom and like these different, like what we think are cooking spices have such a positive effect on our health. But once Western medicine or science gets like, oh, turmeric, we should study this. So then they want to change it. They want to isolate one part of it, the curcumin, is not the same. Just like aspirin, it comes from willow bark. And the reason a lot of people get stomach aches or they just don't feel good after aspirin is because it's harsh on the stomach. It needs the fiber in order to be absorbed properly. Otherwise, we get different types of gastrointestinal problems, such as like a leaky gut syndrome or different problems breaking it down the stomach, because pharmaceutical industry decided to isolate one part of the aspirin and not keep it together with the whole plant. Had they just made a different formula, we probably wouldn't have that problem. So I think, oftentimes they try to make money off of it. It's hard when you can tell someone to plant something in your garden and all of a sudden you don't need to take Tylenol anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And, we talked about studies. Obviously, in this industry, it's hard to get those studies done. But what do you have to, like the anecdotal evidence, the small studies that you've done to sort of allow your products to be sold, basically?
Well, what I've learned, there's a couple answers to this question, because allowing my products to be sold is like a Pandora's box. So, there's a lot of regulations around CBD and what you can and can't say, what you can and can't write, claims that you can't make, even if they're true. And that has been like a where's Waldo since I opened the store in like January of 2019. It has been constantly trying to keep up with the rules for social media, for Facebook or Instagram, or for advertising, or for Google, or, your website builder. And there's so many things you can or can't say. And it doesn't matter how many resources or, notes that I make with, bibliography to prove like this is the science behind, let's say, CBD for epilepsy. And here is all the research of how this helps, with seizures. I still can't really say that on my website. And to that point is I've actually, and since we booked this interview, I've actually closed my store because of the constant berating I received, or shadow banning that I've received through social media. Even though I followed the rules, every once in a while, like a testimonial, someone would use my magic salve and say, oh my gosh, it totally reduced my inflammation in my hand and the pain went away. And I get dinged for something I don't even catch. And next thing you know, my credit card company kept all of our money last year. It took me 6 months to get paid. We were put in Facebook jail, Instagram jail. We got shut out of Google. So even though I'm just like telling stories that are truths and selling products that are third party, tested, grown organically, I know the farmer, I'm invested in all of the experiences. I still can't compete with, big drug companies or even like a Cheech and Chong cannabis industry, because the money's not there. So many small companies like mine, like ZV Botanicals, small CBD companies that are, started with people that really just wanted to make a difference. We are like the dinosaurs. We're not around very much anymore because so many of the small businesses have been bought up by tobacco or pharmaceutical companies, but they are fronted by a different name. And so you don't know that going into the store. Like some of the largest CBD companies in the United States that are like in every store, like Walmart's and Walgreens, and not products I would use, they're owned by a Russian oligarch. Some of these companies are owned by Philip Morris. And, small CBD farms have been bought out across Oregon by Native American casino companies. And so you're losing kind of the hands-on small business oriented CBD companies because of the problem of just like what you're asking of how can you I can put my name behind my product all day long, and I'm very proud of it because of the amount of people that I've helped over the last many years. I've seen things I never thought possible. And I still have clients that, whose kids use my tinctures. I make products for them for autism. I have people with leukemia. I work with people with Crohn's disease, arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and they have less pain, less inflammation. Maybe they sleep better at night. Their appetite's increased. So my goal in life is just to keep educating and counseling and spreading the word. And then now I'm stepping back momentarily from having an e-commerce store and just focusing on educating and finding other companies that are able to stay ahead of all the tech and supporting them.
So right now, because was it more like regulation, like the FDA, like sort of saying you can't make those claims, and then, or was it just like the social aspect of it?
No, actually, it's funny you should ask me that question, because the final ding for me came last year when I was on my way to a conference in San Diego or California, I forget where it was. And as I'm driving out with our van full of all our products, and, we were a sponsor, so all the stuff you do for a vendor table, my bookkeeper was trying to get a hold of me, and I kept sending it to voicemail because, like, we're trying to get out the door to drive to California. And finally, he gets a hold of me. It's like, none of the money from your store is going into your bank account. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, none of your money. You're not getting the money. You've sold the product. It's been shipped. The customer they paid,
Right.
but you don't have the money. And so I jump online. I was like, oh my God, what just happened? And the reason was, so my credit card company that we pay a lot of money for, that did all my online work, said that I was breaking FDA rules because I posted a article on LinkedIn, and I guess maybe on my website, I don't even remember, that was a Mayo Clinic guide to using cannabis for their clients or their patients. And all I did was reshare it and said, I said, kudos to Mayo Clinic for, being behind this innovative new old medicine. I don't even know what I said.
Right.
I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And so, started the whole process of getting the funding back. This was in June. It took me till October to finally get my funds. So it essentially kind of put me out of business. In that time, I spoke to our representative investigator for the FDA for my business in my region and told her what happened. And she said, this has nothing to do with the FDA. She's like, these are companies going after small businesses that aren't bringing in revenue on their online presence and their Google presence. And also the social media, I don't even get it. Like Facebook, Instagram. It doesn't matter how many times we've rebranded twice. We've created 3 different pages. They follow me around and nobody sees my posts. So I was like, I'm done.
I'm quite surprised actually that Facebook would do that because, there's so much, identity theft and stuff that goes on Facebook. I've had friends that have said, someone's hacked into my account and it's selling tickets. I don't know how to, it's impossible to like get through to Facebook to be like, to report someone that they're like a fake person. And this is something that you're like real and you've got your own like business. And that's, for me, that doesn't make any sense.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And, when we've hired specialists and, Facebook specific, Instagram, Facebook specialists that tell us exactly, we didn't do things wrong. Early on, probably 5 years ago, I probably made some mistakes. I probably got a little bit too, vocal with some of what I was sharing, but that's not when it happened. So it was interesting. Same thing happened on Google. I was trying to advertise for a yoga retreat that I was leading in Mexico and had nothing to do with CBD, nothing to do with anything. Hired a specialist for Mexico American advertising with Google Words and Google Clicks and all that, gave my credit card and did a beautiful ad that I've used for years. I've been teaching retreats internationally since 2011. This was nothing new. And I received a letter saying, we have traced you and your business and website to illegal substances, and therefore we will not allow you to advertise on Google. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they kept $1,500 of my money and wouldn't return it and didn't let me advertise for my retreat. So, I don't, and I've met other small CBD companies, like really small, like I'm small. There was this, it was like 4 of us, plus, freelancers that I had hired for different things. But yeah, I can't compete with the big guys. And I think right now they're trying to really just support the big companies. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't go into all that. I just know what happened to me and how difficult it's been to kind of speak my truth. And that's all I wanted to do, is I just wanted to like give people information to make the choices themselves. And then it became like, well, now that I made my choice, where do I get the product? And so that developed into, gosh, I can't find a product I like as much as my own. So it was kind of one of those filling in what was needed. And I'm not done. I'm just,
it's not illegal. Like CBD is not.
I know.
So I for me, like I'm still confused as to why that happened.
Illicit. I'm sorry. They used the word illicit, not illegal.
Okay.
Illicit. I knew once I said that didn't seem like the right word. It was illicit.
Okay.
Still.
Yeah. And then making claim. I mean, but so then you've shifted to just focus on your Ayurveda wellness consulting and those sorts of things, which they can't. I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, is the FDA going to come down on people saying, like, take garlic for a cold or whatever? Like, you cannot make that claim about food. I mean,
I hope not. Yeah, that's why I don't throw away. That's why I keep books. We're moving again, like I mentioned to you before we started our interview. And I keep going through things and taking them to donate. And I'm down to like, okay, if if the satellites go out and we are done with technology for a year, and I need to make sure that, our future generations are still educated, what can I keep? Books. And, these books, these almanacs and these guides that have been passed on for generations on things like what you just said, like the power of garlic, the power of ginger, the power of pure water, the power of the breath and mindfulness. I mean, these are things you can't take away from us. And so I think it's important for the younger generation to have these tools and to pass on to their children. So we are not dependent on technology, and we're not dependent on pharmaceuticals, or we're not going to survive.
Right. And just when I see them all the time, just even here in Europe, like marijuana in its full form is not legalized like it is in states in the US, but there's CBD stores, and they're kind of everywhere. So what are people buying in those, and why are they just not claiming to do anything big, and that's why they can continue to be sold?
Yeah, it's interesting. These numbers that are the legal allowable limits, for example, and they're similar in Europe. They're not exactly the same numbers, but they're arbitrary numbers. These are not based on science or medical fact. For instance, a CBD product that you can buy, easily in the United States, and you can even take it on an airplane with you, must have THC levels below 0.3%. Well, that's insane. I mean, it's good to have something in there, because the CBD does not work as well if it's isolated or if it's distilled, where it's just one part of the plant. You really need the whole plant. And in order to have the whole plant be beneficial, that means you have THC also. It's one of, between the terpenes and the cannabinoids, you have hundreds of parts to this plant that all work synergistically together. Mm-hmm. But a couple guys came up with some number. I mean, it really, and there's kind of I don't know how true the story is, so I won't pass it on, but it's kind of ridiculous where they got this number, and lobbyists grabbed it and took it to the government officials, and they said, that's a good number, we'll use that. It's really not the best number. The ratios are off. But what most people are finding in these stores, typically what I find, because I like to go in and just ask questions and see what they have, is a couple of product lines are good. A lot of it's junk, and it's whatever is like the current, product of the day, a candy, a cookie, a brownie, chips, drinks. I mean, a lot of it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
What I recommend to my clients is always look for something that is, well, ideally from your country of origin. So for me in the United States, made in the United States, grown organically. May not be certified organic because there's a lot of red tape for that. And I wasn't certified organic, but I know every component of my product was organic. I just couldn't put the sticker on because I didn't want to pay those fees. But finding something that's full spectrum and that is in a base that is in oil, ideally, is going to be your best bet. And looking for different ratios. So you can find ratios where it's a dominant CBD tincture, it's a 1-to-1. Those are usually found in a dispensary, which means you have to have a medical card in some states, and in other states you don't. It just depends. A 1-to-1 would mean you have the same percentage of CBD as you do to THC. And for a lot of people, that's going to be very strong. And so I don't usually recommend people start that way, but that's maybe a goal for them. So I'll start people on low levels of CBD. Often less is more. I recommend they keep a journal. They pay attention to how they feel. I help people understand when the best time to take it, how to take it, if and when they should take higher levels of THC, if they should have a ratio of 1-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 1-to-4, because different ailments respond differently to these different molecules in the plant. And so understanding what the issue is helps to understand what to take and how to take it.
Okay. And so for your clients, because you are, a certified CBD clinician, you said, you will just purchase, so you have another place that you purchase those products.
I usually will try to put it in the hands of the client. Like, I'll give them the information they need. If they press me for a recommendation, I give recommendations.
Right.
For like certain brands, or there's a brand that I am just forming a relationship with that I've followed for many, many years, but they were a competitor up until recently.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I think I can now say their name out loud. So I'll be putting that out on my website in the next couple of weeks. Yeah. And they're formulated by a doctor who I highly respect, and the company is owned by 2 nurses who have been in the field for, over a decade. So, now I've reached out to the colleagues of mine that I've made over these years, and kind of explained, because I was small, what I've decided to do. And I've had a few say, "Oh, come work for us." I'm like, "Well, I'm not ready to do that." But what I could maybe do is, pass your company on to my clients as I step back from making formulas. And I'm not done. White labeling is something, and I'm kind of thinking about doing, and I've been approached from some companies, some startup CBD companies are like, "Hey, I want to, we've got funding, we have an angel investor or a board of investors, and we want to start. What do you recommend?" Those kind of consulting gigs I enjoy. I like talking to people about starting their business. I have a book of formulas that I never got to make for the public, just for private use, and I'd love to see those go somewhere someday. But I've decided not to wear that many hats at once. I'm going to stick to just a couple of hats.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Well, we've come to the end. Just to finish off, for those just rounding back to Ayurveda practices, for those who may want to integrate some of that into their daily lives, they might not know how they can start. That doesn't involve, lots of resources and going and buying lots of products. What are a few things that they can do to just get started?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say kind of the easiest, as far as not spending any money, but not always the easiest because it's changing a routine, is pay attention to how you spend your 24 hours. Maybe even writing out a graph, like how many hours do you sleep? What hours do you eat? What are your most productive times? What are your least productive times? And start just paying attention to your own rhythm. And then keeping in mind that when we sleep, we heal. When we have deep sleep, specifically within certain circadian times of the day and night. So between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. is one of the most important times to be at rest, because that's when our body is fully digesting, not just our gastrointestinal system digesting, but we're digesting everything that was brought in through our five senses. And that's what shapes and creates our mind. Our mind is this, subtle, ethereal, like how do you put your finger on where your mind is? But it's born from our sensory input. So during a course of however many hours we're awake, a lot happens. We hear, we see, we taste, we touch, we smell, and that has to be digested, and our thoughts and our emotions have to be dealt with, not to mention the food, the drink, and the air that we breathe. And so people that don't sleep well, or that stay up late, that don't get a good amount of sleep, that's one of the most detrimental effects on our health. And so I usually start with people on trying to create good sleep habits, unplugging from electronics, turning down the lights, maybe having a nice warm beverage in the evening, not eating for 2 to 3 hours prior to bedtime is a really important start for the digestion. Some like self-care things, a tongue scraper is one of our favorite things, and cleaning the tongue, because that's the first step of digestion for the entire process. It's the communication center between the brain and the gut. So things like that, noticing, how we feel after we eat, maybe keeping a journal, taking a 5-minute break, maybe putting it on your phone as a calendar beep to sit down and just watch your breath for 5 minutes a day if you're not already doing those kinds of practices. Basically, we're instilling awareness. And the base of Ayurveda, the way I understand it and the way I share it with my clients and my community, is mindfulness, like being mindful of yourself, and then your impact of your actions on your own self, and then how that then expands to those around you, those that live with you, those that are in your sphere of friendships and family, community, coworkers, because it is like this domino effect of how we treat ourselves, and just being aware. And then all those other things like, food and yoga and herbs and drinks and all the funky stuff that people put on their skin and up their noses and things like that, that comes extra. Those are they work and they have incredible abilities, but the mindfulness starts first.
Yeah, it's really easy. Well, easy to do in terms of you've got all the resources there at your fingertips. It's just, being mindful. That is, as we say that it's 11 p.m. here. So I'm not doing well with your recommendation, but I do live in Spain. So sometimes I wonder, the night people are up later, just generally here. They have dinner at 9, 10. They do have siestas. Well, not on a Monday to Friday basis now these days. It's, things have changed with how society is. But I often wonder that, because these are the people that do have long lifespans, and they're known for, in this aging population, a lot of it is tied to mental health and, the social aspect, having strong social connections. But yeah, I always wonder about that timing thing with the sleep, because it definitely doesn't align with, what a lot of people say in terms of when the sun goes down, you should be winding down.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've created a bit of a monster when we brought in electricity around the world.
Right. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
technology, and it put it at everyone's fingertips to where we really extended our day. And
Yeah.
when, we're not following that rhythm, which is so important. One of the number one causes of illness, inflammation, and death is stress. And one of the number one causes of stress is lack of sleep. And, every course I've taken in Ayurveda or any type of holistic wellness, on day one, if, any doctor or teacher worth their weight comes in and talks about sleep first and foremost every time. So you're ready for this big aha. And you're like, sleep, huh? It's back to sleep. Sleep
Right.
and
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sleep and stress. So, yes, you can sleep when you die, but you're going to die sooner if you don't sleep now. So
Yeah.
I recommend fitting in the sleep. So
Well, thank you, Joanna. This has been such an insightful conversation. So many moving parts, lots of roller coasters there. But, I'm glad that you're well, and that also your dad, assuming he's also well.
yes.
And wishing you all the best with, your endeavors and your next phase as you think about the next step. And yeah, hopefully we'll keep in touch. To our listeners, be sure to visit Jo's website, which is www.jotandberg.com. And, you find more resources there on her Ayurveda wellness practices. And don't forget to subscribe to Holistic Health Habits for more inspiring conversations with leading experts in holistic health. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Surani Fernando, and we'll see you on the next episode.